Hello, Magic Makers. Today, this is a topic that I'm going to have multiple episodes on this. So it's just a thing that I know is at the forefront of so many of you. Many of you have normalized stress. That's just how my life is. Like, that's just, I can't do anything about it, or I'm just going to exercise my way through my stress, right? So I am going to find every expert on the planet Earth to talk about stress because everyone has a great spin on it. And today's guest, Miss Jessica Patching Bunch, who is known as JBJ. JBJ. That's a guy here on the Red Sox, and we were just talking about baseball. JPB. She is here to talk about practical ways to manage your stress. So, Jessica, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. And I always love talking stress and everything you just said in the beginning about how we've normalized it. Like, oh, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
It's part of the reason that I started doing what I do. And so I'm really excited to get into this.
Yeah. So, as I was kind of like skimming through, were you, did you wake up, and say, when I grow up, I want to be someone who talks about stress. That's it. Most people like, I want to be, a veterinarian. I want to be a stress person.
No. I didn't know. It came about in such a as necessity for myself.
Mm.
Throughout my 20s, I had multiple doctor's visits for things that I would go in and they would just say, well, it's just because of stress. So just have less stress.
Oh,
And I, at that time, didn't know that there was such a thing as less stress or that I could manage that at all,
right.
or that I just didn't understand it. And I left kind of angry, just feeling like my
Mm-hmm.
life is stressful. And so, like, that's just super unuseful.
Right. You telling
I
me to
left just
stress.
kind of pissed. Like,
Right.
what?
You telling me to stress less. Like, okay, so what's that look like?
Yeah. Well, and I kind of just was like, oh, okay, well, I can't do that. So, I
Right.
work two jobs and go to school or whatever. My life is stressful. So I guess it's just not a possibility for me.
Right. Right.
Um, and then that just was kind of, I put that aside and just kept on trucking
Right.
because then,
Right.
life continues, and just figured that was kind of the way it was. And then I went to school. I was kind of my education took me a long time because I was terrified of student loans, but
Who
but
isn't?
I right. So I was always interested in psychology, and that's kind of where I started, just kind of human behavior. Why do we do the things we do? Why do we think that's okay sometimes? Just what makes us
Mm.
tick? And I stumbled upon a neuroscience class. It was called sensation perception. I was like, well, that's interesting because perception is, makes up our whole outlook on life,
Right.
right?
Right.
And it ended up being a neuroscience class. And I thought, like, oh my God, I'm not good at science and I shouldn't be here. Like, I got all scared. And then I realized I loved it. And it made so much sense to me, just the underlying these little mechanisms, the biology and the physiology of like why we do of human behavior, of why
Right.
we do the things we do. And so then I just decided that was kind of my path, and I took a deep dive there, and ended up, studying neuropsychology. And I was in a neurodevelopmental lab working on a project for brain development, and I started having more stress issues again. And because I had access to all of the academic articles and things, I started really just looking into like what is stress? What
Right.
is the stress cycle? What is this in the body? And really just getting into the physiology of it. And it just kind of clicked, and it made so much sense to me. Um, and then, life happened. I decided that that lab was not where I wanted to be. What I really wanted was to share all of this information that I had access to with people who could use it, instead of
Yeah.
just, within academia and science and medicine, there's just kind of, there's all this information that's just kind
There.
of hoarded
Yeah.
and like shared between people who like already know these things.
Right.
And I just wanted, it's useful information that every single person can use to just navigate how to feel a little bit better in life, how we work as humans, and the fact that stress is just part of that.
Yeah.
So it was a long winding road, but here we are.
It's funny. You're right, because it's like I think of, a lot of times when I've interviewed, doctors or professors or PhD folk, I feel that most they're like, yeah, there's a lot of information out there, but most people, it's written in a way that the layperson is like dry as like
It
dry as
is.
it's like
Yeah.
super dry, or you have to like read multiple pages to like get to the conclusion of what it should be. And no one's gonna take the time to do that. Like, our
No.
attention span is, I might be off by a few seconds, but it's 2.2 seconds. It's our
Yes.
attention span. And I need you to cut to the chase. Like if it's really interesting, I might give you a minute.
Well,
But
and that's so, I mean, and that's something with our, that our digital capacity and
oh yeah,
technology evolution has changed as well. That's changing our attention capacity.
right.
And not that it's like, because everything about us is malleable, right? We
Mm-hmm.
are constantly changing. So that's something we have to train. And that ties into our stress as well,
Yeah,
is training our attention and our focus. Because when we're used to looking at something for half a second and then swiping, deciding, we look at
right,
something, we make a decision, a judgment about whether it's going to serve us, whether we're interested in such a small amount of time, and then we move on to the next.
right. And one of the things that you mentioned that really like lit up for me was I too in my 20s stressed like a mofo. And I remember just having constant headaches, constant like stomach aches, like always just like, sleep. What the hell was that? And
Yeah.
I'm just like you, I went to my doctor and, I was like, I took time off of work. So there's going to be like a payoff here. Like some type of prescription is going to like magically take away all of my symptoms. And just like your doctor, like she's like, she's like him, she's like stress. And I was like, okay. And
Yeah. So what's next?
right. And this is what she gave me. And at the time, I'm pissed, but at the time it was kind of like that first like bullet hole of light that there is other ways to deal with your stress other than a prescription. She was like, read the book, don't start the small stuff, and take a yoga class.
I love that you even got that.
That was her prescription to me. Literally wrote on a prescription pad. And I was like, what the fuck? I was like, I was so
Yeah.
like at the time I remember driving home being so pissed off. And and I'm sure people, my doctor was very, at the time, I didn't realize that she was very holistic compared to other doctors. Like she wasn't the doctor who just wrote your prescription and said, get out of my office. But like, just like you get these answers that are just like, so like, well, I don't know what to do with this. What you just gave me, I have no tangible way to go home and implement this. And I'm sure people listening have gone to their doctors and they've said the same thing. It's stress, you have to manage it. So if you were that person today, you go to your doctor and you're like, here are the things that are going on with me, and your doctor says, all right, Jessica, it's just stress. How would you then process that diagnosis,
Knowing what I know now.
knowing what you know now?
Um, yeah, so I mean it would be totally, totally different. I'm like everything is stress, everything. And I think so before I talk about like what I would do, I just want to, there's a few things that you said. Just the idea that and this is how we've been taught, right? So you go to the doctor, they know more than you do. So they write you a prescription, they tell you what to do, and then that's it. And
Right,
you don't have any kind of like autonomy or agency over like
right,
how your well-being. It's like, I'm sick, doctor fixes me.
right. Or you don't
And
think you have autonomy, that you can't
yes,
question.
yes, that's what, yes. Well, and that's exactly because that is in, this hierarchical structure that we live in, this power structure that says, the doctor knows more than you and has more power than you, and don't question it.
Right, exactly.
They don't know your body. They don't
No,
know your life.
nope.
They went to school to have a certain kind of education, to have an educated guess about what might be going on with you.
Yeah, let's highlight
But
that.
they don't.
Educated guess.
Yes,
They've
yes.
they've seen more people than you personally, but you are your own experience. So you're like, nah, I might not be like patient X who you're thinking I'm like.
Yeah, exactly. And we do have autonomy. Wellness takes our own participation. It is
Yes.
our experiences, what we do, how we think, how we live, how we feed ourselves creates our health. Our environment creates our health. Our experiences create literally our cell expression.
Right.
And so we have to participate in that. And I think that's such an important thing to highlight
Yeah,
because
for sure.
we have been taught otherwise. And when we have symptoms, we also just knowing, this is why knowing, I think so the first thing is just knowing how a little bit more about how we work, right?
Yeah.
And I love this stuff. I'm super nerdy about like
Mm.
what's going on in the body and brain. You don't need to be like that. I'm not asking for
Right.
everyone to be super geeked out about it, but just understanding some basics, like your nervous system controls everything,
Yep.
right? And so if it doesn't feel safe, it shuts down a lot of the other systems. If it goes into
Mm-hmm.
fight or flight, into that stress response. And so that affects your brain, your digestion, your breath, your menstrual cycle, your muscles, just like every other system of your body is dependent on that. So when we think about stress, I think understanding that symptoms from, headaches and fatigue and irritability, GI issues like,
Yeah.
diarrhea or
Constipation.
constipation, either or, yeah. Low libido, they're across the board. So when we're looking at what stress looks like,
Yeah, it's
have to
everything.
kind of open our perspective on that a little bit because it
Yeah.
doesn't look like one particular thing and it doesn't look the same in everybody. And it can be throughout your body. So
Yeah.
I think that's important. But to finally answer your question, if I went to the doctor today and they were like, oh, okay, it's stress, I'd say, okay, first of all, the first thing I need to do is check in with my breathing.
Mm.
And I heard someone, I was actually talking to a trauma therapist, a friend of mine, and she was like, I had a patient that was like, God, I'm just so sick of people telling me to just breathe.
Yeah.
And it can be if you're going, like, if you're just super stressed out and you're
Yeah.
just feeling like shit, and then somebody's like, oh, just breathe.
Right. And you're just like,
It's, it's
if I could just freaking breathe, you and I wouldn't be talking right now.
yes, yes. And so again, knowing why, like why is
Right.
that so important? And it's because your breath is the link between your brain and body. Your breath controls so much of the function of your, or maybe not controls, influences so much of the function of your other systems, including your nervous system, specifically the part of your nervous system, your parasympathetic system that is the rest, digest, repair system. And so how we're breathing can either increase stress or decrease stress. It can get us out of a stress state or it can
Right.
put us into one.
Yeah.
And so many of us have dysfunctional breathing patterns where we're breathing kind of high into our chest, short, quick breaths
Mm.
or open mouth breaths. All of that is creating a sympathetic response, that stress response.
Right.
And so we're stressing ourselves out with the way that we're breathing. So
Right.
it literally can change your physiology and then also help to calm the mind.
Yeah.
That's why breath is so important. There's a lot of poor information out there for breath work. And I think understanding the physiology behind that, how it actually helps you navigate your system is really important. Because if you're, for example, I was watching a breath work thing on Instagram one time. And it was a huge account, and they were going through this kind of IG Live breath work, and they were having people breathe really quickly and then asking, can you feel your pleasure center? And I'm like, well, no, because you just activated people's like sympathetic response from the rapid breath.
Right.
And I think the
That's not
reason this is so
pleasurable.
important because, well, no, and you've just put people into maybe an anxious state or
Yeah.
into a high alert state. And uh and then people are like, oh, this just doesn't work.
Yeah.
This doesn't work for me, or this is just not. It's like, no, it's just that's not the right tool.
Yeah.
That's not the right method to be using for what you want. And so just knowing how to navigate that, I think is important. So breathing would be the very first thing. Um, oh my gosh, there's so many, so many places to go. The basics, like after breath, just checking the basics. Are you sleeping?
Yeah.
Because sleep is, lack of sleep is detrimental to brain function, and brain health is essential for mental health and for lower stress. And we somehow have this like, I
I'm
blame the
sleep.
80s.
I'll sleep when I'm dead kind of
Yeah,
mentality.
yeah. Just right, like, oh, I only slept like 3 hours last night. And it's like, oh, that's not the flex you think it is. Like your brain is dying. You need
Well,
to.
it's funny because, I have, several clients, and the two things that I tell most people, I was like, I know you want me to tell you to have chicken, broccoli, and brown rice. I know you want me to tell you that. But when I look at, your intake form and you tell me you're averaging 6 hours a night of sleep, and, on a scale of 1 to 10, you're like at, pin high for your stress. I'm like, hey, if you just even added 15, 20 more minutes of sleep every night, and we started to like really identify what are the things that are causing you to be at 10 for your stress, you might find some like quick relief there. And
Yes.
most people, especially people listening here, they want to do, right? So everything you're
Mhm.
saying, I'm like, preach on, sister. And other people are like, for me, breath work was more accessible to me than meditation. Like meditation was like, I'm just sitting here and I'm bored as hell. Like I'm just like,
Yeah.
I couldn't really like latch into meditation. And I'm sure, and if I gave it more time, blah, blah, blah. For those of you guys who are like, give it more time. So, but breath work, it for me, I felt more connected because I was doing something. So I was able to get myself to be more
Yes.
relaxed. So that worked for me better. But again, some people like meditate on with your bad self. But the sleeping part, I think for many people, they're like, well, I just can't do it. You're telling me to sleep, but I just can't do it. I'm a bad sleeper. And that's where, like, just kind of like when your doctor said, well, stop being stressed out. Like for
Mhm.
us to say, stop being stressed out and just go to bed. For many people, like I haven't
It
slept
doesn't
since
work like that. No.
I haven't slept since I was 20.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or my, 40 somethings are like, I have hot flashes. Like, I want to sleep, but I'm like, feel like I'm going to ignite. So I can't sleep.
Yes.
And so, and for those listening, I'm like, yeah, we get that. And it's just a matter of how, I guess for many people, it's like just setting the stage so that you're cruising towards that versus feeling like the moment you click the light out, you have to like be in, sleeping in 2 seconds after the lights go out.
No, and that's such an unrealistic expectation, right? Like, and I mean, that's so much of our stress too, is just unrealistic expectations. And I want to
Yes.
like, there's so many, like, I feel my brain pulling me in so many tangents. There's so much to
Yeah.
say
I
here,
mean, that right there could be the
but
show.
yeah, exactly. But so I want to like, I'm going to go back to just the basics: sleep,
Right.
nutrition. I'm
Yep.
not talking about any kind of specific diet. I'm not talking about any kind of like what I'm not talking about weight loss, first of all, which is what
Right.
most people think about when they think about nutrition.
Correct.
Feed your body. Your body needs proteins, carbs, and fats. Your brain is made of fats. It runs on carbs. It makes proteins. Like you need all of those things. Eat your vegetables to support your nervous system. Um, for function, like that is you are stressed out if your body and brain don't have what they need to work.
Yeah.
And because we restrict so much in that nutrition space or just don't give ourselves proper, like whether it's because of lack of access to fresh fruits and vegetables or just like we don't have time and that's not what we eat or whatever,
Right.
that is also a piece of it. So sleep, nutrition, movement. And I don't mean
Yeah.
exercise for like any specific thing. Again, I'm not talking about weight loss. I'm talking about moving your body around
Right.
because your brain functions when, evolutionarily speaking, our brain grew as we moved more because
Right.
it needed to know what was going on, what's over here, what's over there. And movement is such an incredible stress reducer. Again, that could be a whole show. I could have a whole workshop on that. But so sleep, nutrition, movement, breath work, and time in silence. and then
Oh,
self-compassion. So like, I really want to get into those last two, but the basics, the things that we kind of put aside and are just like, yeah, but what else?
yeah,
What else
exactly.
can I be doing?
Right.
It's like, no, take it, like we don't need more. We need to take some things away
Oh, well, God,
and
yeah.
just look at the basics. Like, are we getting enough sleep? And I am not like we're gonna go back just to talk about that. Are we eating a few vegetables? Are we getting enough protein?
Right.
Are we moving throughout the day? And I don't care what kind of, go for a walk,
And
whatever, move your body.
right. And when you were talking about movement and, I the pat answer I get back from a lot of my clients, I'll be like, hey, Joni, you are just stressed like nobody's business. I'm like, you going to the gym and crushing it for 2 hours isn't serving you. And, the answer I get back, Kim, that's the only way I know how to fight my stress. And that, the analogy I always get back to them, I'm like, your house on fire, and you just literally just keep throwing in more logs. You're just like, the fires you're keeping the fire stoked. Whereas like, can we just pull back on what the intensity is and just move? It doesn't have to be a power walk. You can go out and just walk.
Yes, no, that is such a huge piece of it. And I hear, I work with a doctor who has a running group for women. And that's one of my biggest things that I touch on with them is that number one, running or like tough exercise is not therapy. The gym is not therapy.
Right.
It is beneficial in some ways, but again, knowing how we work is helpful because when you're going to the gym and you're doing super high intensity, whatever, for a couple of hours, you are inducing a sympathetic state. You are stressing your body out. Even if you're lifting heavy, you are stressing your musculoskeletal system, which is
Right.
how, you grow muscle.
Right.
But it is a stress.
Right.
And so we have to know, and this is where I really, I really hate when people are like, just listen to your body. Because most of us have practiced, learned, it's become useful to
we
not,
we've
or
just
we
gone like
just,
this with the switch.
with the shades, yeah, just
Nope.
pulled it out. Nope.
Like, you don't know, I know, like the brain takes over,
Yes.
I know better. Meanwhile, your body is exhausted, and
Yes.
you tell yourself, well, if I just go to the gym, I'll get that endorphin hit.
Well, okay. And so that is true. Like it's not just endorphins. It is like, different types of neurochemicals that help stabilize mood, help grow proteins that help protect your brain cells. It is movement is fantastic. We have to stop press pause long enough. And that's something I talk about with my people so much is just
Yes.
pressing pause. And that's something that our breath can do as well, because our head is always going. Our head is like, go, 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 go. Because,
Right.
our head has our brain has all the information from societal expectations, all of the things we think we're not good enough about, all the things that we think we need to be
Yeah.
doing to be better. And so our brain's like, you have to do this and you have to do this and you have to do it right now.
Yeah.
And that urgency is a type of trauma response.
Right. And do
And
you
I
also,
think,
sorry,
oh, and it's very apparent in our culture.
but do you think that many of, the gym response is caught up in identity, that I I'm the person who is the gym rat. I'm the person who works out. So that regardless of, I had a shit day and I should just go for a walk, or I should just sit in silence, that, doer's mindset, that doer mentality is like, you're a loser if you can't push through this.
For sure, because those are the messages that we hear in gym culture a lot, right? No pain, no gain, and push through, and pain is your body, whatever. I don't just all these.
Yeah, I know that. I'm like,
Right?
wait,
I
I'm like,
forget what it was.
I
I saw
know
it
that.
on a T-shirt at the
Yeah,
gym yesterday. I
exactly.
don't
I know what
remember
you're
what it
saying,
was.
but I'm like, I can't think. I'm like, I see it, but I can't
But
say it.
just kind of all the messages that we have to
Yeah,
ignore yourself, right?
right.
And go be a doer.
Yeah,
Like this is something that I don't think there's never like an end point where it's like, oh, I'm there. Like this is life, right?
yeah,
So we're like, it's a never ending evolution until we don't have the privilege of waking up to do that again. And but as doers, as people who are high achieving and have high expectations for ourselves, we have to ask, what's the goal?
Yes.
What is our goal? Because if the goal is to take care of ourselves, if that is the action that we are trying to achieve, to take care of our bodies, which I think is the main goal for so many people who are in the gym. But I think that there's a lot of layers that we kind of have to pull back sometimes with those societal expectations and the messages that we've got about what that looks like to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
Because pounding yourself into the ground, exhausting yourself when you're already stressed out, that is not caring for your body.
Nope.
And we know that repair doesn't happen until the stress stops, right? And so sometimes your body needs a break. And that doesn't mean you sit around on the couch and don't do anything. And then you're like, oh, I'm such a loser.
Right.
Go for a walk. And again, it doesn't have to be a power walk. Take some time to just be where your feet are. You are still moving. There
Yeah.
are, I mean, if we think about, and again, what is the goal, right? Are we going to build muscle by just taking a leisurely walk? No. Are the brain benefits still happening? The mental health benefits of that? Yes. Is your body still repairing? Yes. So I think stepping back and asking, what is my goal right now with this? What am I really trying to achieve? Is it to take care of myself, or is it to prove that I'm good enough, or prove,
Ooh. Oh my goodness, that kicked me in the
other
shin.
things? Mm-hmm.
And so, as I'm listening here, I'm thinking about, a few people that I'm hoping are hearing this podcast, and you might have like, they're like, oh, is she calling me out right now?
Yes,
and I'm
for
like,
sure.
yeah, we are. Because, for me, I need to be called out. Like I need,
Yeah.
and this is like stuff that I still wrestle with, that sometimes I'm like, girl, sit your ass down. And that's hard, because it's like, if it, I played sports growing up. So it's kind of like, you want to go in, you want to be the like buzzer beater, you want to be the buzzer beater. But sometimes, you know what, even the star sits down, even the star is told to rest during that particular game. But I think you hit the nail on the head, where for many of us who are the high achiever, who needs to get the gold star and the extra credit, is that you're proving yourself to this unknown judge, this judge that in your mind you're never going to meet the expectations that invisible judge sets on you. Because when people always say to me, I'm behind, who are you behind? Like, where
Behind what?
right, like,
Yeah.
show me, who are you behind?
Yes.
Like, where is that, like, and you said it perfectly, like there's no endpoint. So it's like, where is this said endpoint that you're behind, and who gave you these mile markers that to tell you that, like, you need to be by a certain place by a certain time?
Yeah. And I think that, oh my gosh, yeah, this that could be this topic is so huge, especially with women that I work with.
Yeah.
And which I mostly do. Because of these really strong internal critics that we have.
Oh God.
Telling
Yeah.
us that we are not good enough, telling us that we need to do more. And that doesn't come, and I don't mean to put the ownership just on individual people, because that comes from a society that says women have to take care of your families. And if you want a job, you got to do that. And if you want kids, you have to do that. And all of these things, you have to be able to do everything all at once.
Yep.
Nobody can do everything all at once. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And something I think that a big piece of the puzzle that we don't put in is community, right? It's not supposed to be all on you. We are supposed to live in community and have support in all of these things. But so many of us have this idea that, like, I have to do everything alone. And if I can't do everything alone, there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough, or I just need to work harder. I need to push harder.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I want to smash that right now, because that's not the way.
And I feel like that perpetuates onto your stress, because, as I'm working with clients, and I'm sure the same thing with you, you're like, okay, you're like, Jess, how do we take some things off your plate? So that you don't feel like you're always juggling 4 million things. And when you start to, unpack their day or unpack their week, like, why do I got to hold on to that? Wow, I got to hold on. And you're just like, you're like, something's got to give.
Yeah. And, and that's where this work, working with stress, the easy parts, and none of it's easy, right? It is
Right.
hard work. When we choose to like live intentionally and participate in our lives, it's hard.
Mm,
And I think that's part of it too. We have these ideas that with the timelines of like, oh, 6 week makeover with our with especially in like fitness or whatever,
right.
or like we have these expectations of like it's going to be quick, it's going to be easy, and that's just not how it is. That's not what
Right.
it is.
Or
And
after six
so
weeks, this is going to be a permanent thing and I won't ever have to like work on it again. Like
no,
it'll
it's
just be like,
daily. Yeah.
right.
And so that comes like if we're looking at like our physiological patterns, right? Our habits create patterns inside of our body with our in our brain and our bodies, how they work. Like 95% of what we do is on autopilot. It's in our subconscious. And that's
Yes.
so that we can save energy for what is needed now. Right.
Right. Right.
And so your brain's kind of number one thing is survival, which is a whole thing. Like
Yeah.
what we do for survival, what your brain, the stories it makes up for survival, all things, that's a whole other episode. But number two on the list is efficiency. And
Yes.
so your body and brain are going to automate everything it can. So what you do, your brain and body are going to be like, yeah, let's do more of that. And then let's, take that over so you don't have to think about it. And, a perfect example, which is used all the time, is if you're driving and then you find yourself like at home and you're like, oh, how did I get home? I don't remember.
Yeah.
I was stuck in my thoughts, whatever.
Right.
But if you think about the first time you drove, you were so aware of like where your hands were, where your feet were, where looking in the mirrors, where are other people, you were
Right.
very aware. We don't have to do that anymore. And so the same thing happens with stress, how we manage stress.
Yes.
It is a biological tool that we have, an adaptive tool to help us survive. So what we do during stress, your body is going to automate that going forward.
Right.
And so we have to be really intentional. And so much of the stress that we have comes from our own internal expectations.
Yeah.
Right. And our own self-talk about like, oh, you're so stupid. Why didn't you do that? Or God, you should have done that better. The judge that we have inside is a cause of so much stress. And people are like, oh no, stress comes from whatever traffic and money and all the things. Like,
Right.
yes.
Exactly.
And your brain doesn't know the difference between something happening outside of your body and inside your body. You have
Right.
the same physiological stress response when you're talking to yourself like shit and you're treating yourself poorly. It is a threat. You become
Yeah.
that threat to yourself.
Yeah. And it's funny as you were saying that, because most people, as you would just describe, people think about like work stress or money or, all the external things. But some of the things we've just normalized that uh family stuff, it's like you're always running around trying to like make sure that there's groceries and there's food on the table and who's doing Christmas and all this other stuff that it that tape is constantly playing in our head, and we don't think of that as stress. It's just a fact of life that I'm in charge of Christmas. Like, no, I don't know who assigned it to me, but I'm in charge of Christmas, so I have to pay attention to everyone's birthday and make sure we get cards or whatever the hell you do for people's birthdays. But no one thinks of that as this hidden stress that is always popping up in your mind that you don't think of as being stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is. I would say that's the majority of where our stress actually comes from. The expectations that we place on ourselves, like with that, the Christmas example. Okay, I have to do this. Do you?
Yeah. Like no
I
one
mean,
ever
is
anointed
it?
you the Christmas czar.
No, maybe it's something that you want to be doing, and maybe it's something that, but if you don't have the capacity, if you're like, you know what, this is too much right now. And I think that's where, again, we feel like we don't have choice. And we make decisions that are just
Yes,
serving us
that's it.
because we feel obligated to do these things. Whereas
Yes.
we do have the choice to say, no, I'm not hosting Christmas. I'm sorry that you're disappointed. I know that we were all looking forward to this, but I have to take care of myself and it's too much for me right now. And I think, and there's so much in that. That's not easy. I'm not saying that that's easy
No,
because then
that's hard.
people's expectations and all of this, but like you have to take care of you. And saying, I need help or I can't do this right now.
Yeah.
Again, comes back to that expectation that we're supposed to be able to do everything all the time.
Yeah.
If you have a car, You take it in to get serviced, right? You go get
Mm-hmm.
your oil changed. You don't sit in the parking lot and rev up your engine for hours at a time because it will explode. And then you'll be sad because you don't have a car,
Right.
right? But with our bodies, we're like, yeah, just go all the time. You
Mm,
just keep going. If you rest, you suck. Like it doesn't make
exactly.
any sense.
Yeah. And
And
I
so,
love the car example because you're right. Many of us, like, our body isn't going, like, many of us, we need our body to conk out in order for us to realize something's wrong, because
yes.
we've just, we've blunted so many things. Like, I can take an Advil for it. I can take some wine for it.
Mhm.
I can get a prescription for God knows what for it versus, like, as you mentioned earlier, sitting and being like, hang on, my head's bothering me. I've had a headache for weeks and weeks and weeks on end. Why? Is it a tumor, or is it because I'm so stressed that my body is just like, I need you to pay attention to me?
Exactly. And that's exactly it. Your body is always sending signals, right? There's always pain is a request for change. And so
Mm,
we have to figure out what is that change? What is that? And
right.
sometimes, depending, it could be a lot of things. Excuse me. But when it is little things, the things that we say are little, right? Then we're like, brush it off, ignore it, take an
Oh
Advil,
yeah.
have a glass of wine, whatever, all those things. And then your body's like, okay, that didn't work. Now I have to get louder.
Yes.
Now I have
Yes.
to start screaming at you to get your attention because this is not sustainable.
Mm,
We cannot function like this forever. You cannot literally burn out your body's resources and have anything left. And
yeah.
there's that whole like, you need to fill your cup before you can give to others. And I think it's such all those little cliche sayings. I realized that I was like, oh, those are stupid. They're true. They're absolutely true. People say them because they're true. You just don't want to hear it because you want to think that there's a way that you can get
No,
around it.
well, because if you tell me, Kim, you must fill your cup
Right.
before you must fill other people's cups. You're like, you don't fucking know my life, lady.
Yeah. Who's
And
got time for
then
that?
but
I
it
got shit
doesn't
to
give me
do.
anything to do. You're like, I got shit to do. I
Mm-hmm.
can't be filling some cups. Is that cup filled
Yeah.
with coffee? I'm
Yeah. What's
taking
it?
some. So where, like, when people say those cliches, like, that's where I always, like, work with my clients, and I'm sure you do the same thing. We're like, let's unpack, what does a day look like for you?
Yes.
And for a lot of my clients, I was like, who tell me that they're busy, I'm like, let's do a time audit, because I
Oh
had
my
to do
gosh.
that.
So useful.
I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
I had to do that too. Because I was like, sometimes I was like, I'm just so busy. Because, like, that's the normal
Yeah.
response. Like, if I'm like, hey, Jessica, how's it going? Haven't seen you in a while. Oh, girl,
I'm
that's
so
so
busy.
busy. What?
Mm-hmm.
And then no one ever says, what are you busy doing? No one follows that up,
Yeah.
because
What does that
when
look
you,
like? What does that mean?
yeah. So I follow. I'm like, so I just want to understand, what does busy look like for you? And I'm like, even if it's for half a day, I want you just to sit down and just write down, what are you doing in a day?
Yeah.
Because there's something in that day that you can easily say no to.
Mm-hmm.
It might be hard, but when I say when I'm saying easily, you look at it and you're like, you know what? Do I have to be the person to go to the grocery store? Could someone else go to the grocery store?
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's Instacart, somebody else doesn't have, someone else can physically put their hands on that cart other than me.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's stressful because you're like, oh my God, can I squeeze going to the grocery store between pickup, between this, between that? And that is, even though it's grocery shopping, you're like, grocery shopping, it's not stressful, but you're trying to squeeze it in between God
When
knows
it's
what.
another thing you have to do in your day, sometimes it is.
Right.
Yeah.
It
Or
is.
just, I mean, I don't like grocery shopping.
I hate grocery shopping. You know
And I
what?
think oh, go ahead.
The one thing that COVID has taught me, other than wash your damn hands, go to the grocery store first thing in the morning, like during the week.
You're right.
Oh my God. I started doing that, like, during, like, in the heat of COVID. I would be like, as soon as after, like, the early morning hours were, like, done, I would, like, slip in there right then. And I was like, it was me
So nice.
and like three other people. I was like, this
Yeah.
is fabulous. So I kept doing it. And I was like, oh my God, why was I going to the grocery store in the middle of the day on a Saturday?
It's terrible.
This
Yeah,
is
no.
horrible. I get up, I have the same three cashiers. I know their lives now because I'm always there at that time. So that's a little secret. Like, literally 8 a.m. on a Friday morning, you will find me at the Star Market.
I love that. And that brings in something I want to talk like that makes me think about routine. And it also makes me, I just have so many, you talk and I'm like, oh yeah, this and this and this and this.
Yeah.
There's so many things. But I'm going to put a pin in routine. Busy, what that means, what that looks like to
Oh,
people, what that is,
yes.
right? I think that there's so much comparison, right? I think a lot of
Mm,
our stress comes from, I don't think I know, a lot of our stress comes from social comparison.
yes.
Well, they can do all that and they can do all
Yeah.
that.
Their
I should
house
be
is
able to do the
cleaner. They
same
do
things
this with
that
their
they do.
kids. Yeah.
You don't have the same life,
Mm-hmm.
which means you don't have the same experiences, which means you don't have the same time, energy, attention, focus, whatever to do all of those
Or you could
things.
give a shit if you have a clean kitchen.
Or like, yeah, it just, that's the thing. Like, whose goals? That is another thing when we're looking
Yes.
at these things that we have to get done and why we're so busy. Are you trying to accomplish borrowed goals or expectations?
Yes.
Are they even yours? Do you actually want that thing? Do you want to have that thing? Or are you just doing it because you think you should, or somebody else does and you
Yes.
think you need to do that too?
Yep.
Stop. This
Yeah.
is, and it is a lot easier to say than do, but like we each have this current time here to live. Whatever you know comes after that, I don't know. But we are here in this moment. Life is really short. We don't know what we have. Make it yours. Make it yours. We keep asking people for these directions to somewhere that they've never been because they don't have our experiences. They don't have our life. They don't have the things that we have shaping us in our days. And so when you're trying to keep busy comparing with all these other things that you think you should be doing or whatever, ask yourself if it's what you really want.
Yeah.
Is this for me?
Yeah.
Um, and then routines, again, when you're going to the store and you know those people, 8 a.m. on a Friday, you've built that routine and your body's like, okay, it's time to do this thing.
Yeah.
And that's such a great, and I don't like, I know that there's so many people out there, gurus and health experts and whatever, talking about like your perfect morning routine. Again, what does
Yeah.
that look like for you?
Yeah.
Because it has to fit your life or it's not going to work. So, what works for someone else isn't necessarily going to be the key magic fix for you. You have
Right.
to figure out what that is for you. And it may not be the same every day, but when we're looking at safety for our nervous system, right? Our nervous system is always seeking safety.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to predict what's going to happen in a routine is part of that. And that's a
Right.
huge lower to stress. But what I see happen with routines is that they get really rigid and people are like,
Yes.
no, I have to
It
do this
must look
exactly
like
like
this.
this every
Yeah.
single day. Like, you're not a robot,
No.
you're a person. And so even if you have these things like, oh, I get up, like for me, I do my morning and nighttime kind of routines. I call them nervous system hygiene because they're specifically looking at what does my nervous system need right now.
Right.
I do a little movement, I do a little breath work, I have some time in silence, do some writing. But those look different depending on the day, depending on how I'm feeling, depending on what it is that I'm needing and how much energy and time I have to spend that day.
Right.
So it has to be flexible. Again, if it's going to be useful, it has to fit your life.
But I like how, the one I always tell my clients about having their non-negotiables, they're bare bones to it. So you're
Yes.
like,
Yeah.
maybe some days you only have 15 minutes to get that done. So here is the bare bones that you're going to do in that. So maybe your silence is only going to be 3 minutes versus
Yes.
10 or 15. But there's
Exactly.
still the bare bones of that you can incorporate, whether you're at home or you're traveling, or if there's people in the house, whatever it be, but you have these little bare bones that you can stick with it. And I think, like you said, so many people get caught up in like, these are the rules, and if it doesn't look like this, then I can't do it, and they get all like wrapped around the axle. Holidays, oh, Kim, it's the holidays, I can't work out. Why? I'm like, I don't understand. Christmas is one day. Thanksgiving is one day.
Also, who makes those rules?
Right. It's one
You
day.
do.
I'm like, maybe your workout looks a little different because maybe you don't have as much time as you used to, or maybe there's more food choices out there, but then you kind of, instead of just tossing it out, you just have to readjust your routine just a
Yes.
little bit.
Yes, it has to stay flexible or it's never going to be sustainable.
Yeah.
And consistency doesn't look like doing the same exact thing every single day. Consistency means that you are doing something over time that looks similar over
Yeah.
time. And so there's, you know, again, who makes those rules? You get to make them, you get to change them. And I think that's the thing we forget. Like, oh, yeah, I can change my mind at any moment
Right. Or
to make
when,
this fit me better. But when you're talking about those bare bones, that's something I find so much like because there's like, oh, sit and do meditation for 30 minutes or do your hour-long yoga class or whatever. And it's like,
right.
who has time for that sometimes? That's not
Yeah.
what I teach because, like you said, in 2 or 3 minutes, you can change your physiology and or start to change, turn it around. Anyways, put a pause in there. And so if you have 2 or 3 minutes, I think so much of the time people are like, oh, it's not worth it. It doesn't look like it, like it should, or like
Yes.
what it usually does. It's not enough time to make a difference. And it is enough time to make a difference. Use the time that you have, because then you are one, you're giving your brain the reference point to like, oh, I did this thing
Mm.
and I put this effort into myself. But also when we're talking about making changes like physiologically in our brain and body, it's not about the length of time you're doing something, it's about the frequency, how many
Yeah.
times those patterns are firing. So if you have 2 or 3 minutes, use that. And then if you have 30 minutes the next day, cool, use that. But it's not about, it doesn't have to be a certain thing to be useful. Use what you have.
Yeah. And you're right. When we think of most people, when they think of routine, it's, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat versus, okay, well, I typically do it for 30 minutes, but I have 5 minutes. So I'm just gonna do 5 minutes and be okay
Exactly.
with and be okay with that. And as we kind of talked about expectations, is that we expect ourselves to be able to do the same thing over and over and over again, day in and day out, in the same exact pattern and same exact rhythm. And that's for many people that's stressful because they're like, why can't I do it the
Oh
same
my
way?
gosh.
And it's like life, I always like to describe it as like weather, right? Like
Yes.
someday there's gonna be today, the weather was like, we were gonna have 5 inches of snow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have 5 inches of snow outside. I might got three. And so, did it snow? Yeah. And like, it is what it is. So it's like I can't
Mm-hmm.
try to always control every little piece of it. I'm like, I'm trying to control the weather. The weather's going to do what the weather's going to do.
Oh my gosh. There's that, the control piece, right?
Yeah.
So first I want to, yeah, routines have to change because we are constantly changing. And the idea that we should be at the same level of energy and productivity and all the things every single day was made up.
Yep.
And that was made up for to profit people who
Hmm.
profit off of, our labor because for a lot of things, and that's not what this episode is about. But that is something that was made by an idea that someone had. That is not how we actually work as humans. We are parts of nature. And so if we look at nature and how it's changing seasonally every day, between if we just look at the seasons that we know, right? Spring, winter, fall, those are kind of longer periods. But within the days, that changes too, day and night.
Yeah.
And so we have the same kind of patterns in ourselves. And like the Indian tradition of Ayurveda, like that's what that is all about. I don't know. I'm not an Ayurveda expert, but it's the principle that we are of nature and we are constantly changing. And so the expectation that we are at this same capacity every single day, all day, is just not sustainable. It's not realistic because that's not how we work. And
Right.
so I think keeping that in mind that shit changes. We are constantly changing. The energy you have, the time that you have, life happens, right? And we have to be able to work with it and not
Yeah.
against it. And I think that's what we're trying to do is just like fight against all of these things that we wish were a different way or control them, like you said, trying to control every piece of everything. And really, the only things that we can control are the things that we do, our effort, how we
Yeah.
choose to show up, how we choose to look at something. And again, that takes training and it takes time and it takes patience and it takes self-compassion. And I think that that is something that I think a lot of high achieving people have an idea that if I'm not hard on myself, I won't get anything done.
Yes.
I won't accomplish things. And it's just not true.
Yeah, because if like, if I don't set these crazy goals that no one other on the planet is ever going to hit, but I feel like I should be able to hit them, then I'm allowing myself to just not have discipline or not be motivated. And, all the things that we tell ourselves when we think we can get 1,000 things done in a day and we only got 2 things done. They're big things. They're things that it's been on our list for a long time, but we don't give ourselves credit for it because there's still 999 other things left on the list.
Mm-hmm. And that's another big thing too, I see with people. And I know that this is something that I struggle with as well. Celebrate your wins.
Oh,
Even the small ones, especially the small ones.
Right.
Because if we're looking at how your brain works, it has to have the reference point that you are able to do something before it can feel safe and not view that thing as a threat. Yes. So if you're just constantly brushing aside, like, oh, it doesn't matter, it wasn't good enough, doesn't matter, it wasn't good enough, then your brain's never going to be like, oh yeah, I can handle this. I can do hard things. I do hard things. Let's do this. It's going to be more, more in a threat state because it doesn't have you're not instilling the confidence and belief in yourself that, no, I can actually handle these things. And when we're looking at things like anxiety, it's the overestimation of the threat and the underestimation of our ability to handle that. So we have to celebrate our wins and our capacity to do things just to give ourselves the idea that like, oh yeah, I can do these things.
Yeah. And it's funny because we always think that, in order for me to celebrate, it has to be, I have to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
It can't be like, hey, you know what? I told myself I was going to do 5 minutes of something today and I actually did it.
And I showed up.
Right. It wasn't perfect, but I did it. Like I showed up, I said I was going to do it and I did it. And, giving ourselves a little grace.
Yes. And that's the thing too, like what's worth celebrating?
Well, that then it becomes this
you
whole
get
cycle.
to decide that.
Right. It becomes this whole cycle. Well, wasn't the Super Bowl, but I just sat in the seat. I didn't actually play. Well, yeah, that like you made it there.
But like, and that goes again back to those like, is this your goal? Is it something you wanted to do? Did you put effort into it? Celebrate that shit. Like you did a thing. And I think that again comes into like those, taking the 2 minutes or the 15 minutes that you have to move your body or sit in silence or practice nervous system hygiene or whatever it is. It's like, oh, I can't celebrate because it wasn't the whole thing. It wasn't good enough. It wasn't what I thought it was going to look like.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, okay, I did show up. I did this thing. Even though I don't have all the time I would like to have, I still got something in. I still showed up to take care of myself.
Agreed. Yeah. So, I love this conversation because I'm hoping that it's opened up loops. Like my goal is to open up loops for that so that we see the crazy busy isn't serving us. And even though you tell yourself it's not serving you, you're getting some amount of satisfaction out of it. I don't know how much, but you're getting there's some feedback that's giving you that, I can keep this pace up. But for some of you who are listening, who are like, you know what? I really can't keep up this pace, or I don't want to keep up this pace. That's when you reach other people like Jessica, who can really help you kind of, as break free of just stop being stressed.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think this is so important that we talk about these things. So again, thank you for having me on here and thank you for just the work that you do with your people, because there's such an idea that like, if I can't handle this, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
Everyone else seems to be handling it just fine. There's something wrong with me. And if we look at statistics of, just the amount of prescriptions that we have out for anti-anxiety, anti-depression, all of these things, if we look at stress-related illnesses, there was a study back this was like in 2013, and I haven't I know it's only gone up, especially in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
But it was 70 to 90% of doctors' primary care visits in their day were due to stress related issues.
Oh, for sure.
But we're not talking about it. And we're not talking about, I mean, as a society at whole, still, we're just like, it's something like there's a lot of shame around like, if you can't do it, there's something wrong
Yes.
with you. And
Hmm.
that's my big message, is that there's nothing wrong with you. This is just how your body works. And the expectation that you should be able to just be a robot and not a human person is not realistic. And if we talk about these things, we, are opening up the idea for folks that you're not alone. This is not a you issue.
Yeah.
This is something that we all struggle with. And so then we can start to address it and normalize different things instead of normalizing not sleeping and grinding forever and putting yourself out there for everything, saying yes to everything. Normalize sleeping, normalize resting,
Mm.
normalize taking care of yourself first so that you have the capacity to care for others. And again, that looks different depending on what you got going on in your life. But if you got 2 minutes to breathe and take care of yourself, do that. It's just taking those small steps, normalizing, like, you know what, I'm going to show up for myself today.
Yeah, no, and I love that, showing up for myself, and showing up for myself, not in a way that is always like doing, showing up for yourself today could be like, you know what, my body just needs to just be and
And
just
sometimes
sit.
it's, yeah. And I think that's the hardest thing, especially when we're talking to former athletes, or we're talking to just like high achieving people who, that is the work of not doing things. So it takes so much more energy to fight our inner, narrative that we have with ourselves about, if we rest, we're lazy, or if we rest, we're not good enough, or we're not doing enough, or allowing ourselves to just be, even for a moment, to press pause and ask, what do I need in this moment, can be a lot harder than adding another thing to the list. Oh, I'm going to do this.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
I think just highlighting that taking care of yourself, showing up for yourself, doesn't mean you're adding something else always. Maybe it means you're subtracting something from the list.
Yeah, and I love that, because I know I've been this week practicing a lot of releasing of my time, and it's scary, right? You know that you should do it, you know that you need to do it, and even I'm in it in real life, in real time, it's scary, but I'm like, I know that I don't have the space for it anymore, and I know that I'm not going to show up in a excited way, and I know that I don't know what's going to fill the space, but I know something will fill it that'll be more fulfilling for me. And so,
Mm-hmm.
you know, sometimes you got to step out on leap of faith, even though
Yeah.
it feels like you're standing on the edge of a really scary high ledge. But you need that space and grace so that you can have, the nervous system regulation. As we started the podcast off, both going to a doctor, and our doctor's like, stop being stressed. And so, stop being stressed can be letting go of things. And
Yeah. And I want to touch on that, just what you said, that it's scary. And that is exactly what it is, right? Your brain and body, your nervous system has patterns. And what is familiar feels safe because it's predictable, because it's what it
mhm,
knows how to do. That doesn't mean it's what's the best thing for you. It just means that's
right.
what you've been doing. And so if your pattern that you've built is to be stressed out, to be overworking yourself and saying yes to everything, saying no and taking rest is going to feel scary. It's going to feel unsafe for your nervous system because
Yeah.
it's not familiar. That doesn't mean that it's actually dangerous. It means that it's new, and what's new is unpredictable. And so I think that is a huge part too, because like you said earlier, meditation, I'm like, oh, I'm so bored. Yeah,
Yeah.
it is boring. That's something that we have to train, right? So, but in that boredom, sometimes it doesn't feel safe to have that space. It's so uncomfortable to sit in
Hmm.
silence to sit with yourself, to not be doing something, to not have the stimulation of your phone constantly on scrolling, to have, be watching TV or to be constantly busy with your hands. To sit with yourself can be super uncomfortable because it's new.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean it's not okay. It doesn't mean you're not safe, but your nervous system is like, oh, wait a minute. I don't know this one.
That's exactly what it is. And I always kind of, when I'm telling people, like, kind of like to give themselves the space and to kind of move into the uncomfortable, I think about it. It's like when you first start, like, walking on sand, eventually you're like, oh, wow. And then you're like, oh, okay. Your body gets that equilibrium. So it is uncomfortable. It's going to be squishy. It's going to have this weird feeling, but eventually you're going to be like, this is what sand feels like. I'm okay.
And I'm okay. Exactly. And then you have that reference point. Your brain has that reference point of, oh, this is sand. This is what it feels like. I can do this.
Right.
But you have to do it to get that reference.
Yeah. It's like, we both work out. It's like, I don't walk into a gym and pick up the 100-pound dumbbells.
Yeah.
I started at 5 or 10 pound, and I've worked my way down the food chain. And so that's the same thing. Like, we're going to start at the 5-pound weights, and bicep curls probably felt hard originally, but now you're like, yeah, I can pick, I know exactly how to do it, what to do, and know that I'm not going to rupture anything if I pick up a heavier weight.
Yeah. And that's exactly it. And allowing ourselves to be okay starting small.
Yeah, for sure. So, Jessica, this has been such a great conversation. We covered a lot more things than I had my little notes here, so that's fabulous. I always ask my guests, what's one thing that makes you feel magical?
Nature.
Ooh.
Being out in nature is a little piece of magic for me.
Yeah. I love that. We were talking before that we started press record, and I always tell her, I'm always like, no one's ever repeated the same thing. And I'm always surprised at like all the random things that people like pull out. And I'm like, that's a good one. It's a good one. So yeah, for you, nature, I haven't heard that one, but I love it. I love being in nature as well. And Jessica, people have been intrigued by you. If you haven't been intrigued by you, check your pulse. And where can they find you on the socials?
I am mostly on Instagram. That's a good place to find me at jpb.brainbodyresilience. And then through that, you can find my website, my offerings, all that's in my Instagram link. So that's a good place.
Yeah. And so all of that, as if you're on a walk or doing something that you can't write that down, all of that will be in the show notes. And definitely, if you got like one little nugget, like my goal is after every podcast, there to be one little nugget, and for you to take action on that one little nugget. I would love to know what that one little nugget is. Feel free to screenshot this and tag myself or Jessica and let us know like what that one little nugget was for you. All right, ladies, have a fabulous day. Thank you so much. As always, I always appreciate you listening, and I always appreciate when I have amazing guests like Miss Jessica attend.
Thank you so much for having me.
You are welcome.